Phil Twyford.
Chairman, the Minister, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith, in his last contribution, I think, if I'm correct, urged the House to stop what he called nitpicking. And I was kind of reflecting on this, that the Minister thinks that the criticisms that the opposition have of his bill are nitpicking. We have a lot of fun on this side of the House at the expense of Dr Smith, and it's mostly because there is such a big gulf between the scale of the housing crisis and this endless procession of kind of half measures that he brings to the House and to the public. That's why we have so much fun at his expense. But nevertheless, this bill deserves to be treated with some gravity because it is something. It is something. And after prevaricating for several years, the Minister brought a bill to the House that actually does contain some good stuff. It does actually set some standards on insulation and smoke alarms. It has comprehensive provisions that put in place the machinery of government that will be necessary in the future to administer and enforce some proper and decent standards about the quality of housing. So that is something, and that's why we're voting for this bill. But the sad thing about it is that it falls so far short of what the Minister could be doing. He knows that credible New Zealand research and evidence shows that $1 invested in retrofitting houses through insulation and modern affordable heating saves $5 to $6 in future public health expenditure. That's the cost-benefit analysis. And that's why we can't understand on this side of the House why the Minister is legislating in this bill redundant insulation standards that go back to 1978. That's the shame of it. That when this bill passes, as it will because National has the numbers in the House, that hundreds of thousands of rental properties in New Zealand who are currently insulated to the 1978 standard will not have to upgrade to the current 2008 standard. That's the shame of this bill, and that's the poverty of ambition that underlies so much of this Minister's housing policy. The reason for the deficiencies, the rationale for the deficiencies at the heart of this bill is that it would be too much of a burden on landlords. And the Minister is clearly afraid that requiring, for example, a $3,000 heat pump will be such a burden for landlords that they will have to put the rent up. And I think my colleague Stu Nash has put paid to that assertion because we know, everybody knows, the Minister knows that rents are set by supply and demand. Landlords can't just, because they have to replace the roof because it's leaking and spend $10,000 replacing a leaking roof, they can't just put the rent up to recover that from the hapless tenant. And if you consider the case of the heat pumps, Mr Chairman, a heat pump might cost, let's say, at most $3,500. A modern heat pump would have a lifetime of 15 years. Over that time, an average rental property would generate across the country with an average weekly rent of $440 would generate a gross revenue of $340,000. If it's an Auckland property with an average rent of $520 a week, that would be a gross revenue over the 15-year period, the lifetime of that heat pump, of $400,000 of gross revenue. So to suggest that to requiring a landlord to invest $3,500 in a heat pump is going to force them to put up the rents and throw the tenants out on the street, which is the argument that the Minister has repeatedly used, it's a complete nonsense. It will not happen, and it's simply a cover for this Minister's refusal to do the right thing. And he's standing, by taking this position, he is standing up for slum landlords. As an earlier speaker said, there are good mum and dad landlords and professional landlords all over the country who understand the importance of making sure that their rental property is not a threat to the life and health of the tenants. And many of them, Mr Chairman,
The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Fantastic.